The City of Roswell Mayor and City Council meeting for July 24th, 2023. I am Mayor Kurt Wilson, and I'd like to acknowledge my colleagues and council members present. Councilmember Sarah Beeson, Councilmember Christine Hall, Councilmember Lee Hills, Councilmember William Mortland, Councilmember Michael Palermo, and Councilmember Dr. Peter Vanstrom. At this point, I'll now turn the meeting over to our City Administrator, Mr. Randy Knighton, to explain how the meeting is run. Mr. Knighton.
Thank you, Mayor Wilson. Good evening, everyone. In accordance with Section Chapter 3.70 of the City Code, the City Council shall hold regular public meetings. The purpose of City Council meetings are for the public to participate and speak on agenda items which constitute formal decisions by the elected body. These items are listed on the published agenda, which can be accessed via the city website prior to the meeting. This is a public meeting, and some items do require formal public hearings. A significant and important component of these council meetings are to hear directly from citizens on the items listed on the agenda. Public comments or questions are essential for mayor and council to incorporate as they contemplate each decision. Citizens are at the top of the organizational chart for the city of Roswell, and therefore it is imperative for mayor and council to hear from residents during these meetings. If you would like to speak on an item, we ask that you fill out a comment card, which are located at the back of the room and at the podium in order to ensure an accurate record of the meeting. We ask, of course, that everyone exhibit and observe the principles of mutual respect and display the appropriate demeanor during the course of the meeting this evening, which should be and is reflective of this great community. The mayor is the presiding officer and will ensure the orderly exchange of comments, questions, and discussion leading to decisions by the elected body. We do encourage those in attendance and the viewing audience to visit the city website for meetings, events, and departmental information. We also encourage everyone to go to roswell365.com for a calendar of events. And there are a number of events scheduled upcoming in the city of Roswell, which the mayor may speak to shortly, along with some other announcements which promote community, physical activity, and leisure, as we all make Roswell the #1 family community in America. Mayor Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Knighton. At this time, I'd like to call Cantor Nancy Cassell from Temple Beth Tikva to the front for a moment of silence in our invocation.
I face this way?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Perfect.
Well, I'm very honored to be here with you this evening, and I want to share with you that next month, Temple Beth Tikva will be marking our 36th anniversary. And in Hebrew, this is known as double chai, because every Hebrew letter has a numerical value. And the word chai is 18, so if you have 36, it's double chai, and we make big deal out of that, as we will in early August. Now, the reason I'm here is hopefully to offer you some words of inspiration for the work that you do. I can only imagine that when you come together to work on improving and strengthening the city and community of Roswell, at times it might seem as an overwhelming task. And I know that you seek and use every resource available to you. There is a post-biblical body of literature known as Pirkei Avot, which translates as Chapters of the Fathers, and it refers, the fathers are rabbis who compiled a code of Jewish law in the early 3rd century. It's full of wisdom packed into short sayings. One of them, I think, will speak to you. Rabbi Tarfon taught, "It is not your duty to finish the work, but neither are you at liberty to neglect it." So no matter how large and complicated a task might seem, there is always something you can do to advance your cause. Another saying from Pirkei Avot, which I believe you will recognize, is from Rabbi Hillel. It says, "If I am not for myself, who will be for me? If I'm only for myself, who am I? And if not now, when?" I know the essence of this quote is why you are here in your leadership positions for the city of Roswell, and you feel and you act upon a sense of responsibility to all the people of our community. One last excerpt from Pirkei Avot says, "A wise person does not speak before one who is greater in wisdom, and does not break into or interrupt his fellow person's speech, and is not hasty to answer. The wise person asks what is relevant and then answers to the point. Now, one more reading that I want to share with you. I didn't realize you'd be standing for this. This comes out of the prayer book that we use at Temple Beth Tikva, and these words are addressed to God, and it says, knowing that there are people, well, it doesn't say this yet. I know that there are people of many different faiths on this council and in the community of Roswell as well. So this prayer says, help us to hear your call. Grant us enough help to fulfill our duties and the compassion we need to attend to others. Teach us humility that we may perceive our own faults and grant us the wisdom to be forgiving of others. Give us the courage to be true to our highest selves and the charity to see the best in those around us. Give us patience enough not to become discouraged and hope enough to overcome all the fears for the future. I grew up in Sandy Springs. I've been living in Roswell since the year 2000, and I, along with citizens of Roswell, and I'm grateful for the work that all of you do. There's one more saying that we have that I will speak to you, but maybe before that, those final words, just a moment of silence. When we complete the study and the reading of each of the 5 books of the Torah, the 5 books of Moses, we all say out loud, the whole congregation says these 3 words, and the first 2 are the same. Chazak, chazak, v'nit chazek. Be strong, and let us strengthen one another. Thank you.
Thank you, Shalom, Cantor Castle. Thank you very much. And I know you're inviting the public to come join you on your 36th.
Love to. On Friday night, August 4th, we'll be having a service, a very festival service. We do every Friday night, but this one will be right at the beginning of the congregation, 36 years.
Friday night, August the 4th, Temple Beth Tikva.
Exactly sure of the timing. Say 6:30.
We're going to put it on Roswell 365.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Cantor. At this time, I'd like to call United States Navy Aviation Electronics Technician E5, James Montgomery Gibson, to come forward and lead us in the pledge.
I pledge the allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and for the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Navy Aviation Electronics Technician E5, James Montgomery Gibson, I'm going to ask you to stay up there. And I'd like to ask the council to come down for the first item on the agenda under the mayor's report, which is the reading of a proclamation for the esteemed veteran of Roswell Award to United States Navy Aviation Electronics Technician E5, James Montgomery Gibson. When I read this proclamation, you're not going to believe how young this man is. Proclamation, Office of the Mayor, Aviation Electronics Technician, Second Class Petty Officer, James Montgomery Gibson, a.k.a. Hoot, esteemed veteran. Whereas in 1962, James Montgomery Gibson enlisted in the United States Navy and was sent to boot camp in Great Lakes, Illinois, for orientation and indoctrination. As aviation was in his future, Hoot, as he became to be known, spent a year at Naval Air Station Memphis in Millington, Tennessee, for his education in aviation electronics. Upon his successful completion, he was assigned to Carrier Air Wing 10 and VF-62 Fighter Squadron 62, based in Jacksonville, Florida. The squadron flew the Vought F-8 Crusader, commonly known as the last of the gunfighters. And whereas one reason James joined the Navy was to travel and to be exposed to as much of the world as possible. During his tour on aircraft carriers, the USS Shangri-La and the USS Independence, his duties took him as far north as crossing the Arctic Circle and as far south as Gitmo, Guantanamo Naval Base, Cuba. James was deployed for several weeks on Naval Air Station Sigonella, Sicily. Although VF-62 was based in Jacksonville, Florida, he only spent about 3 months total at that location. Most of his time was spent on aircraft carriers in the Mediterranean Sea and neighboring waters. And whereas James has experienced many memorable moments in the Navy, which included being part of air operations on the most fascinating and dangerous 4.5 acres in the world, a Navy aircraft carrier flight deck, he remembers the excitement of watching 90-foot waves washing down their flight deck while sailing in the North Atlantic Arctic Circle. Other significant moments he experienced during his service included President John F. Kennedy's assassination in 1963, and in 1965, when the USS Newman K. Perry accidentally rammed James' aircraft carrier and cut a 20 by 60-foot hole in the side of the ship. And whereas James Montgomery Hoot Gibson was honorably discharged from active duty in the Navy in 1966 and the Naval Reserves in 1967 as a second-class Petty Officer E5, and was bestowed the following medal, the National Defense Service Medal. And whereas he is a graduate of Decatur High School, attended Georgia Tech, and had finished his degree at the University of Georgia. Being born in Atlanta, Georgia, and living most of his life so far in Georgia and Florida, James decided to move back home to Atlanta in 1991. In 2009, he and his wife, Diane, moved to Roswell and have been active and engaged residents since then. Both belong to CERT, Community Emergency Response Team, part of Homeland Security, and have been attached to Roswell Fire Department for several years. And now, therefore, I, Kurt M. Wilson, Mayor of the City of Roswell, do hereby name James Montgomery Gibson, esteemed veteran of Roswell, and call upon all our citizens to recognize his outstanding service to our country and our community, and that there is no higher calling than those who serve the United States Armed Forces. This is yours, sir.
Mayor said I had an hour, but I only want to just use a second to just tell them that I appreciate this honor. My service was relatively insignificant, way compared to all of those that we know who have suffered and given a lot more than I. But I appreciate this opportunity because it gives us opportunity to recognize veterans. And I appreciate that Roswell holds veterans in the highest esteem. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Gibson. I told you you wouldn't believe 1962. Can you believe that?
Congratulations, thank you. Great to see you.
To the dear Gibsons, we are happy to have you stay. But I want to let you know, there's a little tradition that the veterans usually sneak out at this time. So you're happy to stay here with us, but I'm going to give you a little nod if you want to sneak out. We definitely would understand. Because I saw Mrs. Gibson knitting earlier, so I don't, you know. But please stay. We're happy to have you. I don't want to chase you off.
She wants you to turn the air conditioning down a little bit.
Exactly. So the next item on the mayor's report is the approval of several boards and commissions appointments. I'm going to read them off one by one. And there will be several individuals that we will be nominating here and voting on. And I will ask that, with all due respect, I won't be taking public comment on any of our fellow residents that are up for boards and commissions. So the next item is the approval of a Board of Zoning's Appeals reappointment for Mr. John Hanna. Does the council have any questions or comments? Being that the council doesn't, do I have a motion for the approval of the Board of Zoning Appeals reappointment for Mr. John Hanna?
Motion to approve.
Motion made by Councilmember Lee Hills. Do I have a second? Seconded by Councilmember Christine Hall. All in favor, please raise your hands. Thank you very much. Congratulations, Mr. Hanna, on your reappointment. The next item on the mayor's report is the approval of a design review board appointment, Mr. Mark Stovall. Does the council have any questions or comments on this appointment? Thank you. Being that there are none, is there any motion for the approval of design review board appointment, Mr. Mark Stovall?
Motion to approve.
Motion made by Councilmember Lee Hills. Is there a second? Seconded by Councilmember Will Morthland. All in favor of the appointment, please raise your hands. Appointment passes unanimously. Thank you very much. Congratulations, Mr. Stovall. The next item on the mayor's report is the approval of a historic preservation commitment reappointment, Mr. Ron Jackson. Does the council have any questions or comments? Thank you very much. Do I have a motion for a nomination? Motion made by Councilmember Mike Palermo. Do I have a second? Seconded by Councilmember Christine Hall. All those in favor of the approval of Historic Preservation Commission reappointment, Mr. Ron Jackson, please raise your hands. Thank you very much. Congratulations again, Mr. Jackson. The next item on the mayor's report is the approval of Historic Preservation Commission appointment, Mr. Mark Donilo. Does the council have any questions or comments? Thank you very much. Do I have a motion for the approval of Historic Preservation Commission appointment, Mr. Mark Donilo? Motion made by Councilmember Will Morthland. Do I have a second?
Second.
Seconded by Councilmember Lee Hills. All in favor of the approval of Mark Donilo? Thank you very much. Passes unanimously. Congratulations to Mr. Donilo. The next item on the mayor's report is the approval of a Roswell Recreation Commission appointment, Mr. Cliff Ditmore. Does the council have any questions or comments? Is there a nomination? Is there a motion for the commission appointment? Motion made by Councilmember Mike Palermo. Is there a second? Seconded by Councilmember Will Morthland. All those in favor of the approval of Roswell Recreation Commitment appointment, Cliff Ditmore, please raise your hands. Passes unanimously. Congratulations, Mr. Ditmore. The next item on the mayor's report is the approval of a Roswell Recreation Commission appointment, Erica Lohman. Does council have any questions or comments? Being that they're done, do I have a motion for the approval of the Roswell Recreation Commission appointment, Erica Lohman? Councilmember Beeson, thank you for the motion. Do I have a second? Seconded by Councilmember Lee Hills. All in favor of the appointment of Erica Lohman, please raise your hands. Congratulations, Ms. Lohman. It passes unanimously. Thank you very much. All right, at this time, I would like to ask all of those fine Roswell residents, Mr. Jackson, Mr. Stovall, Mr. Hanna, Mr. Donilo, and Mr. Ditmore and Ms. Lohman, if they'll come up front. I know we'd like to take some pictures with you, and I have some letters for you as well. So anybody's here, let's come on up. There's no upcoming events. Gotcha. Do we do Roswell 365? Unlike the esteemed veterans, that we do request that all boards and commission members stay for the eternity of the meeting. Eternity. No, it's not entirety, it's eternity. It was intentional, I promise you. Yeah. All right. The last item on the mayor's report is upcoming events and some other special announcements. I'd like to turn it over to my colleague, Councilmember Lee Hills.
Thank you, Mayor Wilson. Just a couple of things. I know no one really wants to hear that school is right around the corner, but I surmise there's a lot cooking on vacations and last-minute gotta-dos. So there's a little calm before the fall kicks off, but I do want to point out that you can see what's going on throughout our city if you get on the website, www.roswell365.com. All sorts of good things. You can sort by interest base, by date, and see what's cooking around the city that's not just city-organized events. It's things that our business owners and local community organizations put on the website. So if you have anything that's coming up that you'd like to advertise, please go on there and you can submit your own information and advertise your event. The other piece I'd like to point your direction to is the Roswell Arts Fund has a Pathways program down at Riverside Park, John White area. It's in place, it's interactive. You can walk through and find things that are hidden little surprises in the trees and along the trail. And we also have some upcoming events that are interactive in the way of entertainment or artists that are doing performances along the way. So if you will visit www.roswellartsfund.org/pathways, you can see the schedule on there. It looks like this, and there's also a billboard down on the park site there that has all of those items listed on there. So please go visit that. It runs through September 23rd, I believe. So
Do you want to put that on the folks, so folks at home can see it?
sure. Yeah, look that way, and thank you.
Mr. Leatherman, your skills may be required, I don't know.
Already got you covered in the back.
Okay.
I was going to say, it was like it was made for it, right?
And that's www.roswellartsfund.org/pathways, so you can get this on your own personal device.
So Lee, say that again. So you're obviously extolling folks to go check out the Roswell Arts Fund website.
Correct.
And also check out the performance schedule.
Absolutely.
So would you give both the Roswell website and the adjoinder piece to it so people can go to this? Again, sorry, I'm just repetition.
Yes, so you can also find this located on roswell365.com, and you can find this on roswellartsfund.org/pathways. Easier typed than said.
Easier typed than said. And all of these events are on Roswell 365.
They are.
Lee, thank you. Anything else to report?
No, sir.
Thank you so much, Lee.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff. All right, so next is the consent agenda. Does the council have any questions or comments regarding any items on the consent agenda? Thank you very much, council. At this time, are there any Roswell residents who would like to speak on any items on the consent agenda? Yes, ma'am. Welcome, Janet. Please let everybody know your name and where you live.
Thank you. My name is Janet Russell. I'm a Roswell resident. I am a little concerned about items 2 and 3 on the consent agenda, which involve the MOU for Roswell Inc. by and through Roswell Economic Development and Tourism, and number 3, which is approval of between Visit Roswell by and through Roswell Economic Development and Tourism and the City of Roswell. I read the whole MOU, which I don't usually do. It seems like you're tying it up for 3 years. And I know the rules for funding from the state that are governed by the state as far as the hotel motel sales tax goes to fund tourism. I think the first 11% has to go to trails or something, and the next 38 or 40% has to go to tourism. The rest of the money cannot go directly to an entity. It has to be put into the general fund and then can be distributed by the municipality that the tax was paid in. I'm concerned because as a citizen and as a professional in the tourism business for over 40 years, and not just as a, quote, travel agent, but as the former president of a national organization for tourism to Africa, the liaison to the African embassies in Washington, having consulted with various governments to create their tourism products around the world. Also the executive director of the International Federation of Women's in Travel in Atlanta many years ago. I am concerned about two things: intertwining these two entities into one. It's like one hand is shaking the other, or can we say passing the buck to the other. I'm disappointed in Visit Roswell, and I haven't been in my business to make $1 million. I've been in it because tourism is the single largest creator of income in the world as an industry. I was the only American at the International World Tourism Conference in Burkina Faso. I was the American representative. And at that time, the theme was creating sustainable tourism as a means of eradicating poverty in developing countries. Well, we're not a developing country, but it is a way of creating jobs in our town. In March of 2020, our visitor center closed and it never reopened. Never reopened. But they did get almost $2 million in 2 years. I have the finance report from Mr. Luckett. Roswell Inc. in the last 10 or 12 years that they've been in existence has gotten over 10 or 12 million dollars. Millions, not hundreds of thousands. And every year we hear the same complaints. There's nothing going on in our city. What's going on with development? 1 year, June 30th, I think it was 2018, Marcelo Zapata was on council. He said we need to get rid of Roswell Inc. and we need a full-time economic developer. We got one. He's still around, Roswell Inc. is. Just where I live, 3 or 4 businesses have already closed. I could give you a list of businesses that have closed and moved out of Roswell in the last year. And there's never any reference to those. And these are vital businesses in our little town. I don't like it that we're funding these people and they're not doing their job. I brought this along, excuse me. Passionate about welcoming people. My little tourism box that I keep in the car. And I give it out to everybody I meet. And I've probably interacted with more people in the last 5 days than the Visit Roswell people have in a year. I have brochures. I tell them about the movies and the putt-putt golf. I happen to like the Carlos Museum at Emory. I tell them about the History Museum. I tell them about the Fire Labs. I give them about our unfolding Black history. I have this. I tell them about the Cherokee Trails. I happen to be at the Smith Plantation giving something out, and I gave a brief history of the Smith Plantation in Spanish to a couple who just moved here from Venezuela. Now, I don't want to be paid, and I'm not looking for a pat on the back, but if I, as an individual, can do that much for free, what the hell are they doing for $2 million?
Thank you, Ms. Russell.
I'm not quite finished. I have 30 seconds left. I expect more from people who are paid well. I went to the Roswell Area Park the other day to go swimming like I do every day, and there was that mobile tourism truck, which, by the way, was my idea in October of 2020, but took 18 months to implement because I guess if you're getting paid, you don't need to have a push to do it. And there was a tourism truck parked down by where the exercise equipment is, in the handicap parking space. The table was out, the brochures were on it, and the lady who was working there was on her phone the entire time. The truck was not visible from the street, parallel to the street, or anything else. I'm sorry.
Thanks, Ms. Russell.
Thank you. I just want you to know that needs to be wiped off. There should be no MOU.
Thank you, Ms. Russell. Are there any other Roswell residents that would like to address the consent agenda or any items on it? That being said, I'll bring it back to council for any additional questions or comments on the consent agenda. Thank you very much. Do I have a motion to approve the consent agenda? Motion made by Councilmember Sarah Beeson. Do I have a second? Seconded by Councilmember Peter Vanstrom. All those in favor of passing the consent agenda tonight, please raise your hands. Consent agenda passes unanimously. Thank you very much. Next is the Administration and Governance Department. Councilmember Hills, would you read the administration item, please, ma'am?
Thank you. Item number 1, authorization for the mayor and/or city administrator to enter into an intergovernmental agreement with the Roswell Housing Authority for the city to provide procurement services for demolition and land clearing of Roswell Housing Authority property, to provide temporary office space, and to provide temporary storage space for the use of Roswell Housing Authority.
Thank you, Lee. David, I think it's over to you now, isn't it?
Yes, this authorization would allow the city allow the housing authority to utilize the city's procurement personnel in order to procure the demolition services for their property. They would obviously pay for the demolition itself. While that's going on, they will need space to store some stuff, and they will also need space to have meetings. So this can all be done through an intergovernmental agreement if the council authorizes.
Thanks, David. Before I turn it over to council for questions and comments, just a quick note from me. So impressed with the leadership of this city, the leadership of Councilmember Lee Hills, the remainder of the council, Mr. Knight and Mr. Davidson. I can't tell you, it's hard for me to express to you how much work has been done in reference to the Housing Authority. I'm very grateful for the leadership of the Roswell Housing Authority Baird with Chairman Karen Parrish and the rest of the board. These are all residents who volunteer their time and do an amazing job. In the last 18 months, the city of Roswell has made giant leaps in its relationship with the Housing Authority and has, I think, done some things that are going to matter significantly to the long-term structure and success of the Housing Authority. So I'm very proud of this group of people and the work they've done over the last 18 months. Lee, thank you. Karen, thank you. At this time, does council have any questions or comments? Councilmember Hills.
Thank you, Mayor Wilson. I just want to reiterate how proud we are to be supporting the Roswell Housing Authority. You have a great board, great people living in our housing authority, and they need our love and our support, and we're happy to do that. Although it's not written in here, I just want to reiterate that we will be providing office space for a while as far as for meetings, regular meetings, not just board, but there could be some subsidiary meetings on occasion as we work through this next piece of the loan process, which hopefully we'll hear about in November. But this is directly related to 199 Grove Way, and I'm excited about the prospects of what's coming for that. So we'll, yes, and that will have, I'll let our Roswell Housing Authority board members speak to this specifically, but it'll have office space in there, and I'll let you tell about the rest of the bells and whistles. So this is temporary and how we partner with our organizations in the city that are serving our residents.
Thanks, Lee. Any other questions or comments from council before we ask for comments from the RHA? The RHA, you guys are ready to roll. Councilmember Beeson.
One quick question. In terms of the timeline, so with providing procurement services for demolition and land clearing of Roswell Housing Authority property, do we currently have a timeline for that, or is that contingent upon the application that I guess November is what you're saying we should hear back on?
There are a lot of factors that go into, I'm Karen Parrish, I'm board chair of the Housing Authority, for those who are watching. There are a lot of factors that go into that. Right now, our goal is to have demolition complete by November 1st of this year. And there are a lot of factors and a lot of approvals and things that go into that, and including what we're asking for tonight, which is procurement of a contractor to actually do that job for us. So, but that's our goal.
Sarah, did that answer your question? Yes, ma'am. Any of your thoughts, comments, or questions from council? At this time, would the Roswell Housing Authority like to address the mayor and council?
Well, I would. I don't know if we have two additional board members here tonight. We like to bring people in to see how the support that we're getting from the city, and thank you very, very much for what you've done. It's a tremendous boost for the residents and for the board members ourselves. We've had a difficult few years here trying to figure out how we were going to move forward. In fact, just 4 years ago, we had an accountant and an attorney tell us that we are in a race against time and money to figure out how we were going to right this ship. And thank you for your support, because that's an integral part of how this is going to get corrected. Hopefully, our low-income housing tax credit application is approved, and we'll find that out in November. So, but Donzel Jackson is here, Eric Schumacher's here, also board members of the Housing Authority. And that was one other thing I wanted to say, as phenomenal as you guys have been. We've had a slate of residents who volunteered their time and their heart and their soul on this board for many, many years, in and out, and it's not an easy board. It's not an easy task, and it's not a lot of fun, especially when you're having to displace some of your most beloved residents. So I just wanted to reach out to all those who have served on this board and thank them very much for their hard work and diligence in trying to right this ship and creating a better relationship with HUD and with the city and with each other. Thank you very much. Thank you for what you're doing.
Amen. Thank you. Dunzo, anything? Eric?
Kudos.
Just a big thank you.
Yeah.
Everybody's been wonderful.
Just a thank you, and I agree with everything that Karen said. I couldn't say it better. She's a great, great leader, great person for the board.
That she is.
Yeah, and I'm just excited to be a part of this, and hopefully we can bring this project to fruition and create a better environment that will fulfill the needs of the city of Roswell and its residents.
Thank you, Dunzo. Thank you. Eric?
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. All right. Well, with no further ado,
Mayor.
oh, yes, ma'am, Councilmember Hills.
Karen, would you mind just expounding for a minute on the wraparound services, the space that will be at 199 Grove Way, not if, but when the loan is approved and this project is complete and we're ready to move folks in? Would you just describe the interior, how what we're doing tonight, how that will change once the new building is in action?
Sure. So this is temporary. The situation that we're asking for is temporary, because in a new redevelopment of the building that we are due to demo, there are requirements by HUD to include things like a community space where we'll have board members have meetings and open for the public. There's also going to be spaces for the residents for different purposes, and it's going to be a much improved space that we can offer wraparound services. Part of that funding in a low-income housing tax credit application is also the inclusion of wraparound services for the residents. So we may not recreate the wheel on some of those wraparound services, but we certainly will have a services coordinator full-time who will work with our residents and provide things like job training, student tutoring, maybe even health checkups and that type of thing, whatever the residents deem that they would like and what they need moving forward to kind of break that cycle of poverty, so we don't see so many generational families who live here 3 and 4 and 5 generations in the Housing Authority. So,
Well, I know, Karen, 14 months ago, it looked pretty dark.
it did.
And it is a testimony to really everybody up here and many people who we don't see, and to your colleagues. But it's a testimony to your persistence, your unwavering commitment to do the right thing, your faith in God, your unwavering faith in God, and just hanging in there when things were tough and just keeping to push through. So thank you. I'm really grateful for the city. I wish the city knew this story, and they won't, but you've done the right thing, and you have done a fantastic thing for our city and for our residents in the RHA. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Yeah. I agree. Thank you. All right, thank you all. So would any Roswell residents like to speak on this matter? Being that there are no more, I bring it back to council. Yes, sir, Councilmember Palermo.
Thank you, Mayor Wilson. So certainly I'm supporting this tonight. I'm not sure exactly whose idea it was, but I think it's a great idea, and really glad to support it. And just actually want to give credit and appreciation to our 3 RHA board members here tonight, and certainly those members that work hard that are not here as well. But it was just pointed out that It is not an easy role on the RHA. That is a hard job. And the unfortunate thing is, I think if this was our board a decade ago, or whenever those decisions were made that were really good for a developer, not really good for the residents that need a sustainable place to live and not having all these challenges that you're having to deal with. So unfortunately, I think if you all were there 10 years ago, this would be a very easy job, but you're certainly taking on a very hard job and certainly making just amazing progress on when you took over, such a challenge that I just really appreciate the three of you and really your whole board working so hard as unpaid volunteers to try to right this ship. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you for expressing those comments. Any other thoughts or comments or questions from council? Being that there are none, Councilmember Hills, would you like to make a motion?
I sure would, Mayor. Motion to approve the authorization for the mayor and/or city administrator to enter in an IGA with the Roswell Housing Authority for the city to provide procurement services for demolition and land clearing of Roswell Housing Authority property, to provide temporary office space, to provide temporary storage space and meeting space at City Hall or other city property for regular board meetings or other incidental meetings needed for the use of the Roswell Housing Authority.
Thank you, Councilmember Hills. Is there a second to that motion? Seconded by Councilmember Hall. All those in favor of the motion passing, please raise your hands. The motion passes unanimously. Thank you very much. Congratulations. Next is the Community Development Department. Councilmember Palermo, would you read the first community development item, please, sir?
Item number 2, approval for the mayor and/or city administrator to sign a contract with Kendig Keist Collaborative for the Unified Development Code update in an amount not to exceed $107,926. Mr. Gaines?
Thank you, Councilmember Palermo. Good evening, Mayor and Council. I will hold off on starting as Ms. Dybell hands out the document to you, and I'll explain what that is here briefly.
You guys are too good to us. You've already got it in our packet. You emailed it to us today, and you're handing it out to us again. Pretty crazy.
Thank you. All right, so for the sake of the public, I'll go ahead and read through the item summary and then kind of go through the short timeline of how we got to where we are today. A request for proposals for the Unified Development Code update was posted on May 4th, 2023. The purpose of the project is to select a qualified consultant to help update the Unified Development Code, or UDC. The request was to ensure that the contents of the UDC would be reorganized in a manner that is more easily understood by residents, the public at large, the development community, and city staff. The target for completion of the draft document is 120 days from the issuance of a formal notice to proceed. Key items that will be addressed and incorporated into the UDC include, but are not limited to, the following: reorganize the table of contents and document layout to improve ease of use, identify and address redundancies and conflicts, update definitions and terminology to provide clarity and avoid contradictions, provide graphics and illustrations that clearly explain the written regulations. 2 responses to the RFP were received on June 2nd, 2023. After review and ranking of the responses, which included interviews of both respondents, the selection committee recommended that the contract be awarded to the Kendig Keist Collaborative. This recommendation is based on the quality of their response and their demonstrated ability to complete the project per our specifications and desired outcomes. So this came through committee back on June 27th, and at that time, in addition to having the item placed on the next mayor and council agenda, the committee requested that the staff speak to the identified vendor to request a shortening of the timeline for the project, which was originally 6 months, and the desire was to compress that down to 90 to 120 days, or 3 to 4 months. At the last council meeting on July 10th, this body approved the selection of the Kendig Keist Collaborative, but asked staff to renegotiate or to negotiate the final price and terms of the contract, subject to approval by mayor and council here tonight. So that's why we are here. The attached item to the agenda was the statement of work, and what was handed out to you by Ms. Dybell just now was the revised statement of work, which we worked with the vendor to edit today, just this afternoon, based on some feedback that we had received from council members regarding potential scope creep. And I think we have addressed those concerns as far as keeping us out of the weeds when it comes to policy evaluations and best practices and things of that nature. The objective here, as made clear to staff by this body, is to revise, streamline, and update the format and presentation of the UDC with improved graphics and just a more readily available and easier format to follow when trying to navigate the different provisions of the Unified Development Code and all of its sub-content. This was, as was mentioned by the mayor, this was emailed out earlier, and you all may not have had an opportunity to review it in depth, but I know that we actually met with Councilmember Palermo to try to iron out some of the kinks that he had, as well as that had been expressed by some other council members as well. So, as you're looking over this, I'm more than happy to entertain any questions, but I just want you all to be assured that we've done our diligence to try to make sure that this document meets the muster of the mayor and council.
Thank you, Community Development Director, Mr. Jason Gaines. Does council have any questions or comments for Mr. Gaines? Councilmember Beeson.
Yes, I have a clarifying question. My understanding is the current Unified Development Code was passed in its current format in 2014, yes, correct? Section or task 1.2, Plan and Policy Review. Why is it the changes to the provisions within the UDC that have been adopted since January 2016 shall be maintained? I know that there was amendments that happened right after its implementation in 2014 and throughout 2015. Is there any reason why those changes would not be included as well?
The changes from 2014?
From the time of its original implementation. Why is it specifically January 2016?
Well, the changes that occurred in 2014 is actually what was presented as basically the original UDC. That is the baseline for everything that has been amended since that point. And it was presented to us to try to maintain what we understand to be the desire, if you will, of the community as far as what has been adopted even beyond that 2014 point. So that's why 2016 was identified as the baseline or starting point for that.
It's a good question, Jason. Sarah asked, because what's the night that we passed the UDC in 2014, Jackie, what was it, 132 or 123 text amendments that evening? I forgot, I apologize, I don't remember the exact evening. To your point, so the UDC was passed, and then that evening, was it 123 or 132? I apologize.
Somewhere in that range.
Somewhere in that range. So the UDC was instantaneously changed the night that it was passed. And to your point, how many text amendments, sorry, I should know the answer to this question, I don't, but I wonder if you know. How many text amendments have we had since the passing of the UDC?
I have a list downstairs. I know it's over 100.
Well, we had over 100 that night. So you're saying since that time there's been
Since that time frame, we've had, I want to say it's around 120.
It seems like that this council hasn't been involved in 100 just in the last 18 months. But it's a good question, Jason. How would y'all address that question? Because it's a fair question.
Well,
yes, sir. Councilmember Palermo?
So I think another way to accomplish the necessary goal could be, it's really, the end goal that we want is to make sure that this is not going to turn into a 10-year divisive, challenge where we're just going into think of all the different challenging items we've gone through, where it took us multiple nights going through something like whether it was fences, townhomes, whatnot. This is really to make this, ultimately the goal of this is to make it easier for people to understand. It's not to change the content. Correct. And a different way to for that sentence, we could either keep it as that sentence, which would address aspect of really now the content and the motivation of the UDC. A different way to do it and different way to say it could be just that ultimately, if there's any contradictions, the most recent text amendment takes precedent. So in other words, if there's two things in there that might be confusing when you look at both of them, then what we could instead have the sentence just being the more recent ones takes precedent. So that's a different way that we could accomplish, I believe, the same mission in just making sure that the purpose is they are going through and just making sure it's clear and easy to use. And I think whether we had it as is right now, or we had it just that the most recent, anytime there's any question, the most recent amendment takes precedent, and that I think would accomplish the same goal.
I think, Mike, you make a really good point, is that this is not a hashing out of the Unified Development Code. It is a simplification for being able to work with it. And this is, and by the way, it's a little dangerous anyway, to your point, because there's so much that can be interpreted one way or the other. And so you make a good point. This whole effort by this body is not to reinvent, it is to make it simpler. That's it. So that's a good point. Peter, you look like you wanted to say something. Not yet. Okay. So I'm just curious, just a quick floating, how does the council feel about Councilmember Palermo's idea about, in terms of there's a revision that comes up through the simplification, you referred to the latest piece of the latest text amendment. Does that seem like a fair ideal? Sarah?
Yeah, I understand what he's trying to accomplish with this. I guess nobody really provided clarity to me with where that January 2016 date came from. It seems a little bit arbitrary, and I'm not really trying to figure out what they're trying to accomplish in that line.
Let's ask that question, because I don't know. I think that's a great question. Does anybody know the answer? Yes, sir. Councilmember Palermo.
So when the UDC came about in 2014, as you could see by the outcome of it and how different that code was prior to the previous, the goal was really to increase density and turn Roswell into more of a city and a urban, much denser, much higher populated city. And in January 2016, when I started making changes, for example, the key one that came about that started in January 2016 was really protecting our residential neighborhoods from turning into high density, which is what prevented Sassafras, for example, which was the very high dense project that was proposed between Hembry and Chafin, and along with a large townhome project that was proposed and worked on a lot to be on House, in the middle of House, and actually even Mimosa. So Mimosa, there was actually a proposal for Mimosa Hall for the gardens to be turned into a lot more dense housing, which they then pulled out when they found out that the change in 2016 made it so that you could no longer create all that dense housing on the grounds of Mimosa Hall. So that was basically when the density goals of the UDC had changed. But again, I think it's more clear if instead of even mentioning a date, we're just making it clear to them that just if there's any question or any confusion or whatnot, that the most recent update would take precedence.
I think, Sarah, the answer to the question is, and maybe we should put it in here, the era of Mike Palermo begins. Yeah. January 1st, 2016.
There were some key lines in there in January 2016 when I started making changes, and I think that's where we found that date, or it came from.
Yeah.
I think to your point, Mayor, making sure that we're taking the most recent change, which to me makes, it's inherent. Isn't it implied that you would have the most recent change would take precedence over any of the original documentation? Because that's what they're reviewing, correct?
I would, logical, what you just said, but not an assumption that unless we codify.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Wouldn't the language that you're trying to hit the head on with, to me, it seems more that whatever the most recent language would take precedence over if there's any conflicting language in the document. Really what you're trying to say is if you find any conflicting language within the document, the most recent version would take precedence over any conflicting language, right?
By the way,
That's our intent. I agree with everything you're saying. That is the intent of this council, the intent of consultants who are always looking for.
Councilor Palermo, I do have to call on you. I apologize.
Okay, you may.
No, hold on a second. So I was going to say something.
Yep.
So Let's keep it simple. Let's keep it simple, because I have gone back and spent way too much time reviewing 2012, 2013, and 2014, and I have a wholly different opinion about the UDC conversation. I'm of the opinion that nobody understood, with the exception of maybe a very few people, what a form-based zoning code was. They had no idea that they were passing a form-based zoning code, thus the 123 or 132 text amendments to begin starting addressing the many pieces that they didn't, I think, understood. And I don't mean that in any pejorative way. I don't think the city understood it passed a form-based zoning code, what that meant and what that looks like. To your point, a form-based zoning code wasn't meant for a suburb like Roswell, never was, never should have been in the conversation. But we've had it now for 9 years, and thus you've had to make over 200 text amendments just trying to solve many, many, many issues that continue to configurate, and they're still there, right? And we're going to keep having battles. So what this is about is the first step of just trying to simplify it, because this body is going to be called upon next year, right, to address the UDC in a dramatic fashion. Like this time, you're like, this is the first step. Let's simplify it. Now let's go solve for the zoning code. And we've been talking about that. And so this is the first step. So tonight, I want to be careful, myself included, not to step off into the abyss on this very dangerous issue. So that's fair. So Councilmember Palermo.
Sure. So, two things. One, if you looked at the original one that we had looked at prior to committee, or an initial draft, as common with consultants, there was a lot of scope creep. So they did not want to have it as simple and as clear of just obviously the most recent update should take precedent. Instead, it was just to get under the hood, similar to how the first UDC process went, where they then take a boilerplate from a more urban place. But the one thing with the history, so I think Mayor, you call out an interesting point, because there was the explicit discussion that we are going to introduce and change Roswell into a form-based code. I think the problem is the developers advocating for that knew what that meant, and those making the decisions potentially did not fully understand the impact. Obviously, that could be debated, but nonetheless, now there's been a number of protections that have been added that certainly do protect neighborhoods in a way that they were not protected back in 2014 and 2015. So, and even early in 2016, and thanks to this mayor and council, there have been even more improvements added and some great results. But nonetheless, so I certainly do propose that for the sentence under 1.2, where it be the final sentence, that first paragraph, instead, we would have something along the lines of
changes to the revision within UDC that have been adopted since January 2016. How about the most recent revisions? Changes
Yes.
to the provisions with UDC that have been adopted and are the most recent provisions to the code?
Absolutely.
Just that simple sentence? Is
Yes.
that fair enough?
I think
Sarah, would that be
is.
satisfactory?
Sorry, could you say the entire sentence of what it would replace? I assume it would be, say it one more time.
I'm trying to say it as simple as possible,
I'm
so
sorry.
I may screw it up again. Changes to the provisions within UDC that have been adopted and revised shall be maintained, or the most recent revision shall be maintained.
And
Fair.
so I guess my concern is, though, most recent, it's really just if at any time there's a question of precedence, because we're not defining recent. And I'm very concerned with consultants wanting to do things differently and not wanting to do it the way that they're being asked.
Mike, you make such a good point about creep. Jason, Jackie, Mr. Knighton, there's a concern in this body about the scope of this project and it not fulfilling the actual intended scope. In other words, as Mike alluded to, that there might be some creep on the project. And that this is, to use an analogy, the books for dummies on any subject, right? That's ostensibly what we're trying to do, right? We're not trying to change the content at this juncture. We're just trying to say, hey, this is the UDC for dummies. Sorry for that. I didn't mean that as any insult to any of us, but that's all we're trying to do, right? Not change anything relevant to any actionable item inside of the code. And I think that's very important, and I think you hear some concern about that. So that is a concern, and that's going to take some oversight for some expertise.
Absolutely, I wholeheartedly agree. You know, through the conversations we've had with the consultants, particularly through their interview, you know, they verbally have indicated that they are aware of, you know, this being the desire of the mayor and council, and, you know, I take it upon, you know, myself on behalf of our team to make sure that we manage this project in a way that stays within the guardrails, so to speak, when it comes to, you know, the desired outcome. So we accept that, and we fully take on that responsibility.
All right, can you help us word some, yes, sir, Councilmember Palermo.
Just have an idea, certainly, I happen to have something completely different, but when there are any questions to any provisions within the UDC, the most recent amendments or revisions shall take precedence.
Sounds good to me. Sarah? Yes, ma'am.
I would strike questions in that sentence and replace it with conflicting language.
Sure,
Like
that makes
even
sense.
better. That's good, Michael?
Yes, that makes sense.
Any other thoughts, comments, or questions from council? Being that there are none, I'd like to ask any Roswell residents like to.
actually,
Yes, sir, Councilmember Palermo.
sorry,
You get
one-
you- I'll come back to you. Let me get the wave of people that
No,
want to
let
talk.
me, yeah, let me get this one, because I think it'll be a quick one. So you mentioned, Mr. Gaines, the importance of getting this in MS Word, because that makes it so much easier to get things into Municode.
Yes.
And so therefore, it mentions deliverables may be provided in MS Word. Shouldn't it be deliverables must be provided in MS Words?
We can change that, yes, yes.
That's under 3.1.
3.1.
Because you said that makes it much easier for you all and for Municode, so I just want to make sure we're requiring it.
Thank you, Mike. Any Roswell residents that would like to address this item? Yes, sir. Welcome, Eric. Please identify your name and where you live in Roswell.
Hi, Eric Schumacher. I live off of Chafin Road. Tonight I'm here as a citizen of Roswell, even though I am on Planning Commission, and will eventually be seeing this. I've been going through the document that arrived today. And in fact, it was different than Friday. I thought that was a little confusing, but I appreciate that there are some differences that I think are improvements. What I noticed initially was at the top of the document, it says Contract Attachment C. So I'm not sure if Contract Attachment A and B are available, and if there are any other attachments, and where that contract might be. I think I'd like to see what that looks like. I'm not sure if that exists and if this is the only document, but it's something I'd like to note. As I went through the document, I had some other questions. So task 1.2, plan and policy review. The first sentence says, this task includes a review of all applicable plan documents, and then in parentheses, including those in the understanding. And I don't really know what that is. Was that the MOU that we saw before, and is that part of this, or is this in place of the MOU? Was there something else we needed to see? A little bit farther down, it says create a matrix of documents, or create a matrix to document the ordinance-related recommendations from each applicable plan document. And I'm not clear what that means. I know we have the UDC and we can download that, but I don't know if this meant other documents as well. The second page, the first bullet point reads, read each article of the UDC with a focus on the tasks outlined by staff and the RFP scope of work. Is that supposed to be included here? And I don't really know what that scope of work is related to this document, and if it's different from what may have appeared in other meeting minutes or other meeting agenda items. And then on the third page, I think Councilmember Palermo just addressed that, and the bottom and the amendment drafting and adoption. You know, we have a few instances where it says may, and I think that needs to be straightened out, as he noted. But the first one says the UDC will be downloaded to MS Word from the Municode site, which must include the latest codified amendments. Now, I think that from my experience on Planning Commission, when I've asked about what's present in Municode, that it isn't actually updated with all the amendments, and a person would need to go into additional amendments and merge those in. So I don't know if this is an item that would delay the process or if we need to get with Municode, and I don't really know what that looks like. But I got the distinct impression from Jackie in a planning commission meeting that that was not a simple task to get those things updated into Unicode. But it's just something to consider if that's going to delay this process. I also just wanted to mention, you know, like if we're worried about, you know, getting into a lot of discussion about actual code changes, you know, another approach can simply be to modify this a little to create, you know, what you mentioned, Mayor, which is almost cliff notes or a guide for the UDC, because you can go through that whole process of creating a guide that references the actual code and create something that people can use that's more of a picture book, you know, maybe easier to consume for somebody that's not a developer, without, you know, all of the drama per se, you know. And then if you find that there are things along the way that you'd like to change, add definitions, you know, change things according to the definitions in the 2040 comp plan, et cetera. And then you can create maybe a short list of things that you want to add. So it's just a suggestion, because I think when you start to frame it up as a guide, I think that a lot of the panic that people may have over UDC changes can go away. And that would at least allow you to get into discussions around not worrying about even single word changes in the UDC, you know, can make big differences. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. Thank you for your input, sir. Any other comments from Roswell residents on this particular matter at hand? Being there none, I bring it back to the council for additional comments. Councilmember Ranstrom.
Mayor, can you just explain your comment that you just made about next year's goal for you with the UDC? I wasn't quite clear what you were suggesting would be a further goals with this?
Sure, Peter. Absolutely. Since you and I were elected into office back in November of the 2nd of 2021 and took office on January 2nd, 2022, as you know, we spent 45 days working together on policy as a group, as a body. And one of the things that we addressed that we would hope to do was not only just to make this UDC simpler, but that we as a body would address the Unified Development Code and radically change it to make it more in line with what we wish we had done 9 years ago in 2014.
Well, with that in mind, what I would suggest is that we save $107,000 and we roll this into that discussion with the firm that we're going to work with and probably cut that part of it in half when we start simplifying as we start reviewing. So I would rather see this as the staff looking at how to simplify this and not spending $107,000 initially. And then if we're going to take those steps, which I was elected on that as well, then I would favor probably the negotiation would take this initial fee down as we look at simplification and or changes.
That is certainly, yes, ma'am, Councilmember Hall.
Thank you, Mayor. I just have a couple of comments, and perhaps to just dovetail on Councilmember Manstrom's notes. I believe we've tried to address this and have it done at the staff level, and maybe Jason and Jackie can speak to that as to why we've come to asking for outside assistance to get this done. But just my other note would be to follow up on the Muni Code, just to have clarity, if we move forward with this document, to have clarity that the latest updates are in Muni Code, because I thought I understood there is a 6 or month or more delay sometimes just due to capacity.
All adopted text amendments are placed on Unicode once I receive them from Marley with the ordinance update. Normally about a week after they get up there. They are listed if you go to the Unified Development Code webpage on Unicode. They're listed as ordinances adopted, not yet codified. We codify once a year, and it gets placed into the document. Now, if you go into the document at that section, it says amended. If you click on that, it takes you to the new adopted document. So everything is on Unicode. Goes in pretty much like a week after we get it adopted from you. It gets up, gets sent there, and it's pretty much up probably about a week or so after.
Councilmember Beeson.
Sure. To clarify on a couple of items, Councilmember Hall, you asked where they got the idea to do outside assistance. That came from us. We discussed it at the retreat, and it was because we all collectively agreed as mayor and council that we didn't want to overhaul anything. I mean, without, to address the elephant in the room, there's going to be some folks who are on one side of the council who want drastic changes one way. There's going to be other folk, me, who are going to want changes to the UDC going in a very different direction. We're not necessarily in alignment. However, it was my understanding from a conversation we had at the retreat with staff from ComDev, Community Development, was that it was something that they don't necessarily have the capacity nor the skill set to do in-house. Is that my understanding? And it would have to go through an outside vendor? Was that essentially the takeaway from that?
I think another way to express that is that while we are administering the code on a day-to-day basis, doing that while trying to, substantially overhaul it at the same time could be beyond our capacity. And not necessarily that it's something we don't have the knowledge or skill set to do. It's just trying to manage, the day-to-day administration and execution of what the provisions are today while trying to revise them at the same time. And I'll just say from my perspective, I've been here almost 2 years, and when I first got here, even before I got here, there had been money allocated, and set aside for, this particular task. So, it was, something that, when I came in, hey, we've got this money set aside to streamline the UDC and bring it into alignment with the comp plan that was just adopted. So that's kind of my introduction to it and understanding of it.
Yeah, not to ever imply that you guys would not have the skill set to understand your own unified development code. It's the guiding document for your entire department. More so how to be able to untangle something that has been altered. We lost count, was it? Roughly 150 times since it was originally brought in about 9 years ago. It's a lot to untangle, but it was a conversation that we had collectively brought forth, and ComDev said that they already had the money set aside for it. Separately, to address one of the questions that was brought forth by the public, I want to make sure that I'm clear on this with ComDev. For the line, read each article of the UDC with a focus on the task outlined by staff and the RFP scope of work. I say this as someone who's worked with RFP as request for proposal. Professional services firms typically respond to those. I, for clarification, never respond to the City of Roswell's RFPs with my firm, but I've done a lot of proposals before. The RFP and the scope of work is technically part of the contract. When you propose as part of an RFP, you're implying that I accept X, Y, and Z that you've given me within the RFP. So the scope of work in that, while it is a completely different document that's not included in this attachment, it's still a publicly available document through our procurement website that anybody can reference. Is that correct?
So once again, whenever the UDC comes up, conversations get sideways for all of our parts. And that's, I think my simple answer in this, Peter, if I didn't answer it well, I apologize. I think the answer is bandwidth, and I think the answer was what we agreed to in Auburn. Yes. When we talked about this was, there's a desire to get into this code, and I think we all feel that, and we all want that. But the reality is, we got a lot of priorities. Economic development right now, and the team that's working on economic development and creating the master planning on that, right? This will be part of it, and it's really kind of getting the cart for the horse. And I think what we decided was, all right, let's do something that helps a little bit for everybody, which is, and forgive me, Eric, because guide is a better term. I just think of Excel for Dummies, et cetera, like, can we make the UDC for all of us a little more discernible, a little more actionable, a little more definable, a little more understandable? Because I've considered the city to be incredibly at risk when really the only people that understand the UDC in great detail, sorry, Mike, are Mike Palermo, Lenore Bromberg, Jackie Dybel, Eric will say, I do too. Eric, I'm not shunning on you, but like there's 3 people that exist on planet Earth that understand our UDC in Well, I think even Jason would say Lenore and Jackie have, mastery on it, right? And I just think that is such a dangerous position for a city, for anybody to be in, when you have three experts. And we all know that, and we got to address it at some point. In the meantime, this is an effort to, you're right, spend $107,000 to make it a little more digestible, but not to change it, Eric, to many questions you brought up. So, and I think we're very careful admonishment on your part to make sure that no creep comes into this document. So I think there's been a change suggested by Councilman Palermo. And Mike, we'll ask for additional comments and questions from the council, but I do want you to read that very, very, very carefully, wordsmith that you put to it. Additional comments or questions from council? Yes, sir, Councilman Vanstrom.
I'm sorry, I just want to clarify with staff. You welcome this help, $107,000 to have help outside of your own, the employees working under you and your group, the three of you who are the main nucleus. This is something that would be very beneficial for you and would help move this process along, and you do not feel that you could really accomplish what this is trying to accomplish without this help.
Particularly given our short staff situation at the moment, absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Peter. Yes, sir, Councilman Palermo.
Yeah, to detail that a little more to Councilman Vanstrom's point, when talking with our three leaders in ComDev, I somewhat suggested the idea that perhaps we don't pass this and that we don't do it. And basically their request was, please don't do that, please do pass this. And with that, ultimately, I decided that I would still support it tonight, and we'll be supporting it because we should make it easier to understand. We should make it, at the end of the day, it sounds like this is definitely gonna be helpful for staff. It also can be helpful for residents. I'd say it'd be helpful for developers as well, but the majority of the developers do actually understand the code from feedback I get. But I think this will be helpful for everybody. So I think therefore we should just simplify it and see if there are any, and just give the opportunity to have a professional go through to clarify any conflicting language. So I will be supporting it tonight with the updates we discussed earlier that I'll certainly read again with a motion.
Thank you, Mike. Any other thoughts, comments, or questions? Yes, sir, Councilman Worthler.
Just to put a final spin on this, keeping it simple is awesome. Keeping it simple helps everybody in this room make the best and most use of their time. But with Councilman Vanstrom's statement earlier about what if we just don't do this and kick the can down the road for another year and put that money into next year's big development, the way I would like to think on this is if we do that with the RFP and we don't get the correct or best responses back at that point, we've really missed an opportunity to help clean this up now and take a couple good steps forward. So when it comes to spending the money now, I think is a wise move to do that, just for all of our benefit. Keeping it simple is the best way.
Thank you, Councilmember Worthland. Any other thoughts, comments, or questions from council? Councilmember Beeson.
I'll keep it quick. In my opinion, being able to make these revisions to make it more understandable, I understand there's possibly the opinion that developers broadly understand it. It's beyond a developer that would use Unified Development Code. To me, it's supportive. We're really making an investment in economic development, because if you are trying to relocate your business to a city before you've even brought in a developer to begin that process, this helps you decide, or at least understand, what can I do and where. So to me, I think this is more so a sound investment in economic development for the city.
Thank you, Sarah. Ladies and gentlemen, any other comments or questions? Thank you very much. Michael, I'm going to ask you to read the motion with some clarifying language, and Jason and Jackie, give us any pushback on anything that's not clear.
And before I do that, though, I'm sorry if I missed it. Did you give an answer on why this is contract attachment C? Is there an A or a B or anything that we're missing?
No, we hadn't answered that question. Items A and B were attached to the initial procurement memo, which was brought to committee back on June 27th. That they were included with that, and the procurement memo was not a part of the contract approval piece of it.
Okay, thank you.
That's the basic reason for that.
Mike, did you want to ask any other questions to Eric's questions? Task 1, 2, first paragraph, second bullet.
That was the biggest one that I had, but I would like the opportunity, Mayor, if you or any of the other council members have any of those follow-up questions before I make the motion.
Yes, ma'am. Councilmember Hall.
Thank you. This is for Jason, Director Gaines. Including those in the understanding, which is task 1.2 plan, that first sentence. And also in the first bullet where it says each applicable plan document. How many plan documents are there?
There's just really the comprehensive plan, UDC, of course, it's the UDC, the comprehensive plan, and I thought we were including master plans as well.
So the understanding is what was in the request for proposal, and those were the three documents, the UDC, the comp plan, and I'm sorry, what was the
And
third?
adopted master plans, correct.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Christine. Any other thoughts, comments, or questions from council before Councilmember Palermo starts? Councilmember Palermo, the floor is yours, sir.
Thank you. So I motion to approve the mayor and/or city administrator sign a contract with Kendig Keys Collaborative for the UDC update in an amount not to exceed $107,926 with the following updates to contract attachment C, which is the first paragraph under task 1.2, the final sentence of the first paragraph that begins with the word changes and ends with the word maintained, that shall be struck and replaced with when there is any conflicting language to any provision within the UDC, the most recent amendments or revisions shall take precedence. Mr. Davidson, is that clear? Staff, is that from ComDev, is that clear? Thank you. And then the updates that under 3.1 for the third bullet and fourth bullet, we should strike may and replace it with must.
And the second bullet as well.
So that's my question actually for ComDev. Should the second bullet also be a must, or should that remain a may? Editing may occur in MS Word, or editing must occur in MS Word?
Convert that to must, just to
Okay.
to be clear and to emphasize the importance of being able to edit the document once we receive it, if necessary.
So to be clear, all three bullets, 2, 3, and 4?
Yes.
Okay, must, gotcha.
And that is my motion.
Thank you, Councilmember Palermo, for the motion. Is there a second to Councilmember Palermo's motion?
Real quickly, wanted to amend the motion to add an additional line. I just caught it as he was reading. The very last section of the document, there's a table. The final line of deliverables, it says the final adopted UDC 1 printed original plus 10 printed copies. There's no mention of a Word document, so there's no digital obligation. So adding the additional line for that table, that their final deliverables should be, I guess, provided in a Microsoft Word format, not printed.
That's a good catch, Sarah. Thank you. Michael, you agreed?
I do. I just want to say.
With that? Yes?
Absolutely. And I do remember reading that, but I'm having trouble finding it right now. I just want to be able to see it with my own
It's
eyes
the
again.
very last
Very
page
last
in the
table.
table.
Okay.
Very last one.
Yep,
Last
okay.
thing you're looking at.
Yes. So I would want to include that in the motion as well, that under the deliverables, it is the, let me just get the exact wording that it uses in this one. It's an editable document in MS Word format.
Yes, sir. Correct, Sarah?
Yes, I would add the bullet point so that way, because I assume they're providing it for this final meeting, making sure that staff has it within their hands, that they're not having to recreate this whole thing. So yes, just adding a bullet point, not altering
Yes.
language.
So under deliverables on the final page, right under the bullet under, we'll add one under PowerPoint presentations, and it would be a bullet that would say an editable document in MS Word format.
Digitally available or digital?
Digitally available for the city of Roswell.
Director Gaines, good to go? Outstanding. Thank you, Councilmember Palermo. A motion's been made by Councilmember Palermo with some revisions and added to by Councilmember Beeson. That motion has been made. Is there a second to that motion? Second is by Councilmember Hall. All in favor of the passing of this particular motion, please raise your hands. This motion passes unanimously. Thank you very much. Councilmember Palermo, would you read the last community development item, please, sir?
Item number 3, approval of the initiation of a text amendment to the Unified Development Code to section 5.3.4, carriage house, and 5.5.2, use table.
Thank you, Councilmember.
Ms. Tybal?
Good evening. This is the initiation for a text amendment to the Unified Development Code for Article 5. 5.3.4 carriage house and section 5.5.2 use table. This was brought forward to you at the July 10th council meeting for initiation. This was to propose carriage house to be allowed in the downtown house zoning classification with 700 square feet for conditioned space. And it would be a conditional use in the downtown house zoning classification. At the July 10th council meeting, the mayor and council asked us to take this to the Historic Preservation Commission at their next available meeting for a discussion item to receive their comments and then to be brought forward back to you at your meeting after that meeting. Their meeting was held on July 12th, which was 2 days after your meeting, as this was a discussion item, and these were the comments that they had. They did discuss it at that meeting. They were supportive of the request for a carriage house in the downtown house zoning classification, knowing that the process included several different approvals before the building would be constructed. They didn't have a concern about the 700 square feet. However, they did have a concern about the 700 square feet that it would not be appropriate in the Mill Village district. So they felt that the 500 square feet that's currently existing in the UDC for the downtown zoning classifications would be better in the Mill Village district. So they just felt that that was too large in that section of the historic district. And those were their comments. So this is brought back forward to you for you to decide if you would like to initiate the text amendment.
Thanks, Jackie. Comments, thoughts, questions from council? Councilmember Palermo.
Thank you, Mayor Wilson. So this is something that I obviously want to discuss, and I asked staff to bring forward. And with that, I'd say another aspect I would like us to discuss and consider is around rear setback, because under this zoning type, under DH, there is the opportunity to do additions, and there is the opportunity to do different types of building additions, et cetera. And with it, they do have rear setbacks they have to that have to be followed. Whereas with a carriage house, it's my understanding that the rear, because it'd be considered an accessory dwelling, right? In which case, or accessory structure, in which case it would have a smaller rear setback, I believe. So that is something that I would prefer to address, that if mayor and council does decide to allow for carriage houses within the historic district, that we are increasing and really just making sure that there is a rear setback. So that's one thing I'd like to discuss. And also, I did suggest and want to discuss increasing the square footage minimum from 500 square feet to be, or I'm sorry, maximum from 500 square feet, into increasing that. And of course, staff brought up, well, RS12 is 700 square feet. My preference would be that we increase it from 500 to 600 square feet, and not to 700 square feet. So those are certainly two of the aspects I'd like to discuss on this. Now, with it, for someone within DH, what is the rear structure for a primary structure? I'm sorry, rear setback for a primary structure, and what is the rear setback for a accessory structure?
Okay, so a rear setback for a detached house in the historic district under all the downtown zoning classifications the rear setback for a principal building and structure is 15 feet. The rear setback for an accessory structure is 10 feet. The rear setback for a carriage house in the historic district is 10 feet.
Excellent. So thank you for that. And so with that, certainly would like to discuss with this mayor and council, but my preference would be that if we are updating this DH to allow carriage house, that the rear setback would be 15 feet instead of 10 feet, just so that it's aligned with principal structures.
Thank you, Councilmember Palermo. Any other thoughts, comments, or questions from council? Councilmember Beeson?
Could staff provide clarity on the reason why they believed 700 feet would not be appropriate for the Mill Village district specifically?
So the Historic Preservation Commission just felt that that was a little too large in that area due to the fact that the houses were a little bit closer, and they felt that it just was a little bit larger than they thought for some of the other lots here and there around the historic district that might be, a little bit bigger. Pretty much some of Canton Street have a little bit larger lots than some of the properties along the Mill Village area.
And second question is for carriage house, one of the main uses could be for a garage, is that correct? A car, for vehicles?
Yes, a carriage house can contain a garage. Mm-hmm.
So with the understanding that the 500, I think you had said 600 square feet, just keep in mind for mayor and council, for a two-car garage, it's going to be between 600 to 700 square feet usually, for a two-car garage, allowing for the cars to be able to be comfortably parked and open your doors. So keep that in mind for if that's what the intended use is for a carriage house. Most folks are going to want to have a two-car garage at least.
Yes, sir. Councilor, let me just make a cautionary statement to the council. If we get into an extended conversation about details, I'll ask for a recess and then come back. And if we can't solve it, we're going to take it back to committee. So I don't want to have an extended conversation about the granular aspects of this. So I'd like to come to a conclusion pretty quickly. Councilmember Palermo.
So just to be clear, whether it's 500 square feet or 700 or less or more, it does not affect the opportunity to have a two-car garage. This is just affecting the livable square feet above the garage. Is that correct?
Correct. It'd be the conditioned space only.
Yeah. So because today, with the, for example, 700 square feet for RS12, that's just the condition of space, whether you have 200, whether you have a two-car garage or a three-car garage or whatever it might be. But that being said, I'm not wanting to get into the granular aspects. I mentioned the two areas that are certainly important to me tonight, which is the rear setback going from 10 feet to 15 feet and the maximum square feet being increased from 500 square feet to 600 square feet.
Thoughts, comments, or questions from council? So there currently is a approval of initiated text amendment on the table. The council asked for input from the HPC. You've gotten it. And then there's been some additional comments from Councilman Palermo. So status of this in council's minds is what at this juncture? Councilmember Hall.
I certainly understand the 700 square feet being a large conditioned area in the Mill Village area, and I would support what Councilmember Palermo is proposing, the 600 square feet and the additional setback.
Thank you, Councilmember Hall. Any other thoughts, comments, or questions from council? Councilmember Palermo, do you have a motion?
I would actually like to give the public the opportunity.
I do apologize. I can't wait for that. Thank you, sir. Any Roswell residents like to weigh in on this matter, please? Eric, yes, sir.
Hi, Eric
Welcome.
Schumacher. I just want to make a couple of points on this one. First, I believe this was initiated because there's a single property owner
Yes.
On Canton Street.
Yes.
That was interested in something like this. I think their ask evolved a little bit over time. And when I looked at it, it looked to me like potentially staff didn't offer one of the existing solutions. So my interest is really to understand our capacity, as a city and pushing these through does take a lot of time, and some of us are volunteers. And I want to make sure that when we make a change like this, that it really has a larger impact. So it's my understanding from asking a lot of questions and doing some requests that we actually haven't had a lot of requests for this on this property type. There's 118 lots of this zoning class, and we haven't had any other asks recently. So the demand is really, we have a single property owner that is interested in this. And that property owner doesn't actually live on this lot at this time. This lot is about 12,000 square feet. It's less than, I think, a third of an acre. And they own the business there. So when we think of a carriage house building type here in Roswell, you have to live on the lot. It has to be your primary residence. So I guess in this case, if this was added as conditional use, that property owner would have to come to you and ask for the carriage house, and then you would have to figure out how that works when you build a carriage house and some assurance that they would actually end up using this property as a primary residence, right? So 700 square feet, or the other building that's there, which is about 900 square feet. It may have a basement, I'm not really sure, I haven't been in the house. So when I looked at this property, I saw that there's some other building types that are possible that could give them exactly what they want without changing code, and that's two-family, for instance. So that's actually a duplex. That is possible on this lot, and you can make a duplex look and be, much the same as a carriage house by using some connection between the two structures. Now, the advantage of that for the property owner is that they are then not limited to the square footage that they are with a carriage house. They can build the garage as large as they want. They can, in fact, go higher than a carriage house. A carriage house is limited to 18 feet at the wall plate, okay? And that can actually be a little bit difficult to get above a garage, with the kind of ceiling heights that we like these days. So if they went with a two-family, the other advantage is that they can build a bigger structure, right? Obviously, they need to go to HPC to make that appropriate. They can go taller, I think 2.5 stories perhaps. There's a lot of different rules for the historic district. But the other thing there is that they can actually sell that property. They don't actually have to live on that lot. So they can continue with the business in front. They can have another structure in back. Both of those two structures combined can be a greater tax benefit to the city of Roswell, and then get what they want. So I don't know if staff has reached back out. I did ask them to do so. I don't know if that was something that the property owner wanted, but I really would like for us to think about capacity and some of these changes. This is for one property owner. And we just spent a whole bunch of time talking about simplifying the UDC. And here we are looking at something that contributes to the high number of changes because one property owner wants it, and really, in fact, it's kind of a complicated situation because they don't actually live there today.
Thank you, Eric.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Any other Roswell residents that'd like to address this matter? Welcome. Please share with us your name and where you live.
Here, is this right?
Yes, ma'am. Perfect.
Margie Cooper, property owner of the 1131 Canton Street, also a Roswell resident at 2040 Wilson Ridge Court. Our intent is to, while it is currently being used, the Canton Street property, currently being used as a nonprofit organization. It is not a business, it is a nonprofit organization and has been since we moved into it on Youth Day of 2010. The UDC code started to change in 2012. It has been very challenging trying to both run a nonprofit and keep up to the point you made earlier in the last item. It's confusing and it's changing. But here's the thing. We currently are operating a nonprofit out of there with an intent when we bought in 2010 to downsize from our home in Roswell to this property on Canton Street. Currently, our nonprofit, which is 900 square feet, is bursting at the seams, and we have moved desks so many times we can't move desks anymore. So we need a little bit of a relief to the cramping that we have there, and we are trying to think of a design that also suits our further intent to live there one day. We're not getting any younger. Currently, the UDC, and I have to just compliment Jackie brilliant knower of the details of the UDC. I've been before the council twice before to put in a fence and to enclose a porch. Both of those were not easy because we had to use the fence materials that the city wanted as opposed to the materials that we wanted. And we replace pickets yearly now because people crash into them from our adjacent property. That's a side point. However, the current UDC has 3 places in it in conflict. There's a narrative paragraph which mentions downtown home and carriage house. There's a design use, I don't know what it's called. It's not the usage table, but where they draw the little schemas of what can be put on a downtown house designation, and a carriage house is drawn there. The only place out of these 3 where the carriage house is not permitted is on the usage table. And I was told by the city that that is the table that matters. So it supersedes the other 2 tables. I appreciated a meeting with Councilman Palermo and the Community Development Department. And when we left that meeting, it was my understanding that the 700 square foot conditioned property was amenable and it matched something else that exists elsewhere in the UDC code. And the setback was not going to change. So while I am just one house, it is a house that I would like to use. And I'm a City of Roswell resident. I'm not a developer. I'm not trying to change the character of Roswell. I'm trying to improve the character of Roswell. If you looked at photographs of the property when we bought it and the way it looks now, it's been dramatically improved, I think, and we have received many compliments on it. So I would just like to emphasize that this gentleman who spoke before me is correct. There are only 115 or 120 designated downtown home zones. So you could almost let I understand not wasting time on doing an umbrella decision on a category in the UDC that is so small. It's probably the smallest category in the UDC. But I would just ask you to also, with respect, Councilman Palermo, to retain the 700 square foot. We live in a 900, so I'm very familiar with what 900 is. It's small, and not change the setback. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you for your comments very much. Would any other Roswell residents like to speak on the matter? If not, I'll bring it back to the council for additional comments, questions, thoughts. Councilmember Palermo?
Excellent. So I do want to just to clarify that today the requirement is 500 square feet. So the discussion is not to reduce a requirement, but it's just to what should we increase it to if this mayor and council chooses to increase it. So I want to clarify that for sure. The thing is also for both the square footage as well as for a rear setback, Ms. Dybel and Mr. Gaines, I believe both of those could always be requested with a variance as well, right? So if somebody did want bigger, whatever the maximum is, whether it's 500, 600, 700, whatever the maximum is, someone could request a variance to increase that. Is that accurate? Yep.
That's correct.
And then same thing with a rear setback. So if a rear setback is 15 feet, someone could always request a variance to make it smaller. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. And this would be a conditional use, in which case, either way, whether someone's requesting a variance or not requesting a variance, either way, this would be coming to mayor and council. Is that correct?
Yes, the way it's written at this point would be it's a conditional use.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thanks, Councilmember Palermo. Any other, Councilmember Hall?
Thank you, Mayor. This question is for Jackie. So if the applicant wanted to put a 900 square foot additional structure, they could do that under the two-family and just basically have like a breezeway attaching them or some kind of walkway that attaches the two houses, is that correct?
If the applicant wanted to put in an accessory structure, they could do that right now with a breezeway and connecting it. Accessory structures are allowed. Under the current code, an attached house is an allowed use.
So an attached house would be like a two-family?
Like a duplex.
Yeah, so they could just make another house there and just attach it by a little walkway? and
Yes.
By breezeway, and they could make it effectively larger than the primary residence or the first house?
It would not have the 500 square foot limitation.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Christine. Councilmember Beeson.
I think this is an excellent example of us making something far more complicated than it needs to be. I was completely fine with the language as it was presented. I think it made sense. Everyone was on board. I'm not super sure what changed everyone's perception. I think we just had a resident and someone who runs a nonprofit gave a very good example of a time when the UDC is not someone, the end user is not a developer in this case. It's a resident and someone who runs a nonprofit. In this situation, this is conditional. It's up to mayor and council to approve the conditions. Instead of having somebody have to build a breezeway in order to create a new housing type, I would much rather rely on the fact that it's conditional. Same with Mill Village. Instead of having to create a new neighborhood overlay or separately define what Mill Village would be, mayor and council, be it us, be it mayor and council 20 years down the road, would have the ability to say that's far too large of a design to fit on that property. It's conditional. We don't approve those conditions. That said, the question that was asked by the public as to why we are doing this, in this situation, we have one person who's asking when it's 100 and a dozen houses.
118, yeah. 118, just FYI.
118, because in this case, it doesn't have to be a special circumstance. We're just clearly defining it for the sake of our code. That said, I'm good with the original language. I'd like to move forward with that.
Thanks, Sarah. Any Councilmember Mike?
So I actually agree that I in the sense that I absolutely support adding this as a conditional use instead of needing to just get more complex under the current code. So I think we're in agreement with right there. I think the big picture is right now we're looking at making a change that is going to affect over 100 homes in our historic district, and I think we need to make sure that we're not changing the rules for everyone based on one thing that sounds pretty good. Because again, with a variance, someone, including the person that got up and spoke, they could come in and request a conditional use for a carriage house, and they could request that they want the square feet to be 600 square feet as I'm suggesting it should be, or they could request 700, they could request 800, they could request 900, they can request whatever it might be, and mayor and council ultimately can decide what that should be. And then as for the setbacks, with the character of our historic district and knowing that is going to affect so much of our historic district with over 100 of those lots, and as you saw it's a large stretch from the north of Canton Street into the back of the Mill Village, as well as a lot of Mimosa. Yeah, so am I looking at that correctly? Yes, I am. So as you can see, that's a lot right there, and I think we need to make sure we're doing it strategically, knowing that with the variance request, they can always request multiple aspects. But I don't think we should be making it easier for more of these properties to cover up more of the lot and go to the further back neighbor, et cetera. So that's where my concern is. It's not that I'm saying I wouldn't potentially support a variance request for this one applicant. I'm saying we're going to do something that's going to affect 118 properties. Let's make sure we're thinking about the 118 properties and not just one property.
So Mike, just for clarity, this is your motion, right? And if I'm hearing you correctly, you're not in favor of it.
No, what I'm saying is I brought forward and suggested that we do discuss making it a conditional use within the Mill Village, which is not today, and I still support what I initially brought up.
This sounds like something that needs to go back to committee.
I think there probably is more to discuss, given there's 818 and all that, and it doesn't seem like there's full agreement, so I think that might make sense.
So, any other thoughts, comments, or questions from council? All right, would you like to make a motion, Councilmember Hall?
Still my motion.
Yes, ma'am.
So my comment is, this applicant if we went with 600 square feet and the additional 5 feet for a 15-foot setback, nothing, and made it conditional, there's nothing that would prohibit this applicant from coming in and asking for 700 square feet in their application. They have to come before us anyway, it's conditional.
Let me say this to my colleagues, like, this ought to be squared away before we get to the dais. I don't like the changes at the dais. It's all that I can take right now, not to go into recess, as this is the last item, and go for an hour recess, just so we can stop doing this, because this makes us look silly to our fellow residents. It makes us look silly to everybody. This is stuff we got to stop. So either we have it ready when it gets to the dais, make comments based upon the germane aspects of it to it, up or down, right, or send it back to committee. So this is, to me, this is not great for us. I just, yes, sir. Councilmember Palermo.
Yeah, and what I'd say too is we did get additional information by getting to listen to the HPC and letting them weigh in on it. And it was interesting discussion, a little more, obviously a short one, but a little more than what was shown. But with that, I would like to motion to move this item to tomorrow night's committee meeting.
Outstanding. Thank you, Councilmember Palermo. It's a motion made by Councilmember Palermo to move it to this item to tomorrow night's committee meeting. Is there a second? Second by Councilmember Mortland. All in favor, please raise your hands. It is so affirmed. This item goes to committee meeting tomorrow night for discussion. Thank you very much. Thank you, Jackie. Thank you, Director Gaines. All right. That being said, City Attorney Davidson, would you read your item on your report, please, sir?
Thank you, Mayor. The only item I have is a recommendation for closure to discuss personnel litigation and/or real estate.
Thanks. Do I have a motion for closure? Motion by Councilmember Beast. Do I have a second? Second by Councilmember Worthland. All in favor of closure, please raise your hands. Those such, we move to closure. Thank you very much. Being that there are no other items, this mayor and council meeting of July 24, 2023 is adjourned. Thank you very much.